Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to St Mary's Vicarage on this, the 9th of September, Wednesday, the 9th of September. Well, things are a-changing, as they say. Things are a-changing. It's beginning to get alarming again at the rise in COVID cases that has happened over the past week or so. Going from under 1,000 a couple of weeks ago now to nearly 3,000 new cases a day. Also, that as they say, this seems to be mainly from younger people aged, I think they were saying, sort of 19 to 30. And in a sense, with all the universities and colleges going back, and being a parent of youngsters in that age group, that is indeed very worrying. I was chatting to Alex, my eldest, who's now up in London at the Royal Academy of Music, and he was saying that they've implemented a lot of strategies to keep youngsters in these learning bubbles. And when we took him up there on Saturday last, he was given a document that was this sort of thick, explaining all of the sort of regulations and protocols that had been put in place. They've been very thorough. So, for example, on the accommodation, the floor that he is on, he has a room, but they have a sort of a shared toilet block. Well, the toilets and showers have been numbered, and only 3 people can use whatever specific toilet. They have to eat at different times in the sort of dining room that's there. They're having quite a few of their lectures online via Zoom, and they've been told that he can only associate, I think, with 12 people in his group that are doing the same course. That, in a sense, is his bubble, and they're not supposed to associate beyond that. Chatting to him so far, I think they're all trying to adhere to that. But we were all young once. We were all 19 and 20, and the temptations to relax that and to go and meet down the pub or wherever it may be is a very strong thing. So it is worrying, and even though on the whole the virus does seem to have less an effect on young people, though some young people have become very seriously ill from it. Other youngsters have had it mildly, but then seem to be suffering from a form of fatigue that is really debilitating. I have a friend whose daughter is at university, and she is suffering from that, having had COVID back, I think, in February or March this year, and is as a result has real issues with fatigue. So it is quite a worrying time as we watch that graph slowly starting to rise. And even though the death rate at the moment is still relatively low, if you look at the graphs from earlier on in the year, the two of cases and death don't follow each other. The cases goes up first, and then the death rate follows up behind. So we are in a worrying time again. And of course, last night the government has changed the regulations again, not just in the sense of lockdowns in various parts of the country, be it Bolton or Caerphilly or other places, but nationally across England now, saying that more than 6 people cannot gather together inside or outside. Now, that, wise though it may be, now presents me with a very interesting challenge and dilemma, both as your vicar and as a rural field officer. This afternoon at 2 o'clock, myself and my colleague Richard Curlew, who's the rural chaplain of the diocese, we're supposed to be delivering a webinar to clergy and lay people, which was all about how you could celebrate harvest outside the church, because obviously we can't really do harvest inside the church because of the restriction on numbers that you could safely get inside a church and maintain social distancing. So the solution seemed to be to hold outside acts of worship, which have been allowed, and at the moment are sort of still in the guidelines. But it does pose a question, and I've emailed our what we call Rural Hope team leader, our team leader Sarah, because we did have a long discussion yesterday about the whole issue of singing hymns, and there seems to be some very mixed advice about whether you can sing hymns even outside the church. Now, we have been having some outside services and we have been singing hymns, and I know other clergy and other parishes who have been having outside worship and have been singing hymns. And in the Church of England guidelines, there is nothing specific about singing hymns outside, only in a church. However, it appears that some senior members of staff, there's a difference of opinion with regard to this, so it's very confusing. We need clarity, which may well mean that it may come to the point that the singing of hymns is not allowed outside. However, just to add to the confusion, of course, if you have a choir, whether it's professional or amateur, they can sing outside, and this is where we end up in this complete farce of nonsense, because, you know, there are some choirs which number 15 or 20 people, and providing that choir, be it amateur or professional, can socially distance within the building, they can sing to the congregation. However, it begs the question, why then, in a rural church where you maybe have a congregation of less than 10 people, 8 people perhaps, maybe 15 people, so why they, who are not the choir but are socially distancing, cannot sing hymns? So you know, the whole thing is very, very confusing and very, very farcical. And for those of us parish clergy who are on the coalface, it's not helped when we get conflicting messages from the Church of England, from the government, from local authorities as to what we can and can't do. And let's face it, we are not the only organisation that is feeling this frustration. Listening to the news this morning, particularly in those places where lockdown seemed to have happened, pubs and restaurants seem to be very confused about what they can and can't do, seems to be conflicting advice there. So it is very, very confusing. But however, as I say, what is particularly concerning me is that from the perspective of being the vicar here, is that now the government has made this decision that people should not congregate, more than 6 people should not congregate inside or outside. Is it right, is it sensible for us as a church or a benefice to be looking to hold a harvest service outside, be it on a farm or on public land, in a barn or wherever it may be, that may attract 30, 40, 50 plus people, even though within the Church of England regulations, which I went through this morning, it doesn't seem particularly clear whether that is allowed or not. So, as I say, I have sent an email to our team leader to ask her to clarify this with our bishops. And as I say, secondly, at 2 p.m, I'm supposed to be delivering a seminar online, a webinar as we call them, with the rural chaplain, encouraging people to do just that, to celebrate harvest on farms or in barns or outside, so more people can gather together than would be able to in the church. I have to say, I did not sleep very well last night at all thinking about this. So it is a real dilemma, and I also feel for my other the other members of the Rural Hope team, the other rural officers, because they are all producing webinars and seminars about celebrating Remembrance Sunday, All Souls Day, Advent, Epiphany, Christmas, you know, doing a Christingle outside. But if the government has now said that 6 or more people really shouldn't gather together, both, you know, inside and outside, even if there is an exemption for the church, should we as a church be encouraging what could potentially be large gatherings of parents and young people outside for Christmas events? It's very, very confusing and very, very difficult. And we really do need, as clergy on the ground and our church wardens and PCCs, who are the legal bodies of our churches, we do need some clear advice as to how we should move forward with this. Now, that also brings into focus a little bit what we were planning this Sunday. Now, thankfully, the new restrictions don't come in until Monday morning, so the planned prayer walk that we were going to do on Sunday can still go ahead, but I had put another one in the diary for October, but realistically, looking at it, if the government is saying that 6 or more people should not gather together outside, then doing a prayer walk from Monday onwards round a village or something like that is really not acceptable if there are more than 6 people there. And let's face it, that was the whole point of trying to organise something like that. So it's a very, very confusing time. As you know, Kate, my lovely wife, is a teacher, and I know head teachers and teachers have been dealing with this for a couple of months now and weeks, and finding themselves in this situation where they have just set up a classroom or a school or got something right and they think we're good, it's following the regulations, and then of course things change. Now, this isn't about blaming the government, because regulations will change. We are in a pandemic situation, and the aim of all of us is to keep those numbers down and to stop people falling seriously ill and dying and being in hospital. So I have no issue with regulations changing, even if they change overnight, because that decision does have to be made in order to try and deal with the numbers. The problem is in a sense not the decision itself, it's in a sense how that decision gets clarified is what causes the difficulty. So when you say no more than 6 people should meet inside or outside in order to reduce the number, to me that makes perfect sense. I get that, I understand that, I do not have an issue with that. But then the problem is you get all of these nuances that, you know, well, you can still go, I can still go down the pub and I'll be in a group of people that will be more than 6 people. They might not be 6 people I know, but there will be more than 6 people. On Monday, I was down at Avon Beach and had hired a beach hut. Now, I was there with just 3 people, but around me, beach huts to the right and to the left and in front of me were other people. There were certainly more than 6 people there. So it just becomes very, very, very difficult. And for those of us trying to manage this and see how things are going to work, whether you're a vicar, a teacher, a publican, restaurateur, running a shop, whatever it is very, 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 very challenging. And so prayers, please, for all of us as we try to work out what this is. But as I say, I am concerned now because my other colleagues, the rural field officers, are putting a lot of work into guidance and on how to celebrate the forthcoming festivals outside. But now with this new restriction, that might not be possible. And even if in a sense legally it is, should we actually be encouraging that? Interesting times. Anyhow, I am looking forward to an email from our Rural Hope Coordinator, from Sarah, who I hope, or from the Carol R. Comms Communications Officer, that one of them would have spoken to the Bishop or the senior staff team and given us, particularly Richard and I, a steer as to what should happen at 2 o'clock when we try to present this seminar. Interesting stuff. Anyhow, it is a feast day today. Surprise, surprise. It's not, so this comes from this book, and as I've explained before, in this book you have, in a sense, the traditional saints, like the Roman Catholic saints, and then the Church of England has thrown in a few of its own as well. And today is one of those. Charles Feud Lauder, priest. So Charles Lauder was born in 1820 and came under the influence of the Oxford movement during his studies at Exeter College in the early 1840s. For those of you who really don't know what the Oxford movement is, the Oxford movement was a group of clergy and students at Oxford who wanted to reinvigorate the Catholic tradition within the Church of England, and it was very, very successful. It had a huge effect on the church at the time, and it brought back into Anglicanism and the Church of England more Catholic style of worship, the use of vestments and incense and all of that, the importance of the Eucharist and the Mass. So it did have quite an effect. So that's what the Oxford movement was. I was also very, very privileged to, because I belonged to a society which sounds very grand, called the Society of Catholic Priests. Now that sounds very sort of old-fashioned, but it's actually quite a modern society, and it was a new society that was set up after the ordination of women, because the old-fashioned traditional Catholic societies within the Church of England, of which there's several, but there's two main ones, would not accept women priests as their members. So those of us who came from a high church Anglo-Catholic background, who did not have an issue with the ordination of women, formed a new society called SCP, the Society of Catholic Priests, which women priests could join. And I haven't had a lot to do with it recently, but when I was in Oxford, I was the rector of SCP, which means I headed up the Society of Catholic Priests within the Oxford Diocese. And as a result of that, and because the chaplain of Exeter College was there, we were able to have a dinner, a very special dinner, in the room where the Oxford movement used to meet, where these people would meet to discuss how they were going to sort of bring back more Catholicity to the Church of England. So it's very, very interesting. Anyhow, we'll carry on. So that was the Oxford movement. After Lauder's ordination, he became increasingly drawn to the Tractarian and ritualist expression of the faith, especially after his move to London in 1851. Despite the fierce opposition such Catholic spirituality faced within the church, as a curate in Pimlico and Stepney, and then as the first vicar of St Peter's London Docks, Lauder came to epitomise the 19th century Anglo-Catholic slum priest. Dedicated to the poor and destitute, he was tireless in his parish work. His health gave way, and he died at the age of 60 on this day in 1880. And that tradition of the sort of Anglo-Catholic slum priest, particularly in inner cities and East End London, is very, very strong. And many of them did some really sterling work there, in a sense of not just worship in churches, but they set up youth clubs for young people, boxing clubs, sports clubs, all sorts of things, to, in a sense, give people new hope and a new vision. And in a sense, the worship was quite interesting because it was very high church. It was bells and smells, lots of gilt and gold and such like. It was actually quite important, and because for these people living in these very, very poor slum areas, they could never really experience anything of that greatness and beauty in their daily lives, in their homes and the slums that they lived in. But when they came into their local parish church to worship on a Sunday, or to go in there during the day, they were suddenly met with all this beautiful art that was there, all of this gilt and gold, and in a sense of awe and beauty. And though, of course, there's the argument that, you know, all of that money could have been spent on the poor and such like. Yes, indeed, but it was actually done for the poor. It was to give them a place where they could come and, in a sense, be surrounded by beauty rather than surrounded by the slums and the squalor that they had in their daily lives. And of course, many of those churches still are in existence today. However, as somebody who would call myself a Catholic evangelist, I'm somebody that comes from the Anglo-Catholic tradition, but I like very focused on mission and evangelism. It is all about getting the balance right. It is all about getting the balance right, and that's one of the things I've learnt in my own pilgrim journey and ministerial journey. My own personal spirituality, it does lean more to a Catholic or Anglo-Catholic expression of that. But I've learnt as I've gone along the road to be open to other expressions of the Christian faith, and I've learnt a lot from them, from the evangelical movement, from the charismatic movement, and in a sense that's why, and I've said this before, if people ever really want to pin me to a mast, I will say I'm an Anglican, because of course the joy of Anglicanism at its best is we are this broad church. We are both a Catholic church and a Reformed church in one. And of course the prayer book, brilliantly put together by Cranmer, in a sense exemplifies all that is good within the Catholic tradition and the Reformed tradition. It's all there. And that's when I think the Anglican Church is at its best. The problem is now is that, and I do have friends that work in these churches, the problem is when we end up going down the road of ritual for ritual's sake. You know, there's nothing wrong with a high mass, but we have to sort of ask ourselves, why are we doing it? Are we doing it simply because we like it, or we like getting dressed up, we like incense or whatever, or is it really bringing people to God? Because that is what worship has to be. Is it really bringing people to God? The same can be true if you spend time in evangelical churches, and I've spent a lot of time in those as well, and I do like the lively worship. No bells and smells. There's not dressing up in a ritualistic sense, but there is, in a sense, what I like to call the evangelical uniform, but I'll spare that for another day. But I have been to some services that were worship services, and I've stood there wondering, is this actually an act of worship, or is it a concert? And I say that because there's been a fantastic band up on the what is now become a stage where the altar would have been. Yes, they're singing religious songs, but everything seems to be focused on the band. And believe me, I've been to many, many rock concerts as well. And I've stood there thinking, what is the difference here? So I think that is the challenge for all of us in worship, that in a sense we must think about, is worship bringing people to God, on their pilgrim journey? Is it enabling them to have an encounter, a spiritual moment with God in our worship? Or is it performance? Because whether you're guitars and drums and evangelical band on stage, that can become a performance. Or you're in a very, very high church in Pimlico somewhere with lots of lace and choreographed liturgy and everything like that, that too can become a performance. And I think that is the challenge for us in mission and ministry today. And also to remember the fact that, we are now dealing with several generations of people who are not used to worship at all. So though we might think the sort of lively evangelical band, oh yeah, well that's great, that's going to appeal to everybody, it doesn't, because it's very alien in the same way as walking into a very high Anglo-Catholic church in London and seeing what I would describe as a beautiful liturgy, but I sort of understand what's going on, could just be seen as completely alien. So the challenge in mission is how does our worship enable people who maybe aren't familiar with the Bible, maybe aren't familiar with worship and tradition in the church, how does it enable them to engage with it and for them to have an encounter with the living God? Interesting stuff. But that's where Charles Lauder and the Oxford movement were coming from at the time, and that's the important thing to do it. They weren't doing it just because they liked dressing up. They wanted to do it because they wanted to bring a sense of awe and mystery to worship that had become very, very wordy and was very cerebral rather than here. So it's an interesting thing. So Charles viewed Lauder. The church gives thanks for him today. So let's just have the reading for today, which is quite an appropriate one, from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 6, verse 20. It's the Lucan version, really, of the Beatitudes. Fixing his eyes on his disciples, Jesus said, "How happy are you who are poor? Yours is the kingdom of God. Happy are you who are hungry now, you shall be satisfied. Happy are you who weep now, for you shall laugh. Happy are you when people hate you, drive you out, abuse you, denounce your name as a criminal on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice when that day comes and dance for joy, for then your reward will be great in heaven. This was the way their ancestors treated the prophets. But alas for you who are rich, you have your own consolation now. Alas for you who have your fill now, you shall go hungry. Alas for you who laugh now, you shall mourn and weep. Alas for you when the world speaks well of you. This was the way their ancestors treated the false prophets." This is the gospel of the Lord. Very powerful words, particularly when we use them as a looking glass or a lens at the world today. So I hope you all have a pleasant day. So it's going to be quite a challenging day for me as we try to wrestle with these new guidelines and what advice we should be giving clergy this afternoon. But I hope you have a good day today. Let's just close with the grace. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen. Take care.